What's up guys, and welcome back to my channel this week. My name is Priscilla. I'm a Nigerian women's wear designer based in London. This video is going to be a continuation of the coat project. So my previous video was a coat pattern tutorial, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to assemble all of the pieces together. It's quite long, so I have to say grab a cup of tea, a glass of wine, glass of juice, water, whatever takes your boat or whatever rocks your boat, and just enjoy the process. So if you guys like to see how this coat was put together, make sure to keep on watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy watching it, and make sure to watch up until the end and share your final thoughts in the comment section down below. So let's get straight into this video because it's going to be a long one, believe me. Plaid fabric in two sort of color combination, navy blue and gray, and then a lavender color and like a shade of blue, and I thought the two of them really worked together. I used a total of 3 meters of sort of the main fabric, so 1 meter of the lavender one and 2 meters of the navy blue plaid, and then I used I think 1 meter or 1.5 meters of lining on the inside. I also used some interfacing as well, just to ensure my collar, my facings, everything that is involved in the lapel situation is nice and stiff. When it comes to outerwear, you want to make sure that the finishing is really nice because it's on the outside. It's what people would see first when they see you, and I didn't even nail everything 100%, but it's a solid 80. I also will be needing a pair of shoulder pads to give the shoulder of the coat more structure and definition. I also got matching navy blue thread to go with my fabrics. As for the pattern I'm going to be working with, I've done a separate tutorial and it's linked in the description box down below. So if you haven't seen it already, please go check it out before you come back here to see how it's all sewn together. So I've just gone ahead and I've pinned my patterns in place, and I'm just cutting out the different panels of the jacket. What I decided to do was to play with the patterns and placement of the prints or the colors in such a way that I would have the lavender along the facing on the inside, along the lining of the sleeve, as you can see here. I'm just going ahead to cut all of my notches, so it's just easier for me to put things together. And then for the other material or the other plaid is sort of the rest of the jacket, so the outer main body is in this darker navy blue and gray plaid colorway. So I'm just going in here and I'm cutting with my fabric scissors, cutting out all of the pieces I need, and I cut out my lining pieces as well. So this here are my lining. I cut out my back as well as my front. I cut my back facing and I went ahead to fuse it to give it more stability. I also cut out my front facings and I fused them with interfacing as well on the wrong side of the material, so my lapels come out nice and stiff. I also cut out my pocket pieces. You need 2 pairs for this inseam pocket, 1 pair on each side of the coat or of your jacket. I also cut my lining, my sleeve lining in the lavender plaid because I want to be able to see a little bit of that material when I turn up the sleeve. So I went ahead and I cut out my main pieces as well in the outer, for the outer of the jacket. And for this front piece here, I fused it because I want that facing pair that will create the lapel to be nice and stiff. I also cut out my side panels, which you'll be needing 2 for, 1 for each side of the front, and I cut out my epaulettes. You will need 2 pairs of this to make that sort of shoulder detail that you see on a lot of like military jacket and so on. I also cut out my Revere collar. I cut out 1 in each fabric so I can play around with that if I want. I also cut out my back pieces, cutting the bottom in the navy material and the top in the lavender plaid. So when I sew everything together on the back, the Revere collar is sort of connected to the back of the jacket through this top half that I cut in the lavender plaid fabric. So I also cut my outer sleeves in the main fabric as well. I cut 2 of them, 1 for the left and 1 for the right. So now it's time to sew, and the first thing I decided to do was to join all of the panels together so we have whole pieces that we're working with. So the front has 2 pieces per side and I'm just pinning them together like like this along that sort of mid side seam, and I'm going to pin it up for the left and for the right hand side. So once I go to the machine, I know I just have to sew everything together, so I have one whole side for the right and one whole side for the left hand side when it comes to the front panels of the coat. So I'm just going to take this to my domestic machine and sew on a 1 centimeter or 0.4 inches seam allowance using a normal straight stitch all the way from the beginning up until the end, not forgetting to do our like back stitch at the beginning and at the end. So I'm going to join up the back panels as well. The back has 4 panels. I'm just pinning together the center back panels like so, and then I'm going to pin together the side panels to this center one like this. So I'm just grabbing the corresponding panels and pinning them together, especially at the notched points, because when you have curved ends, you want to make sure the notches match, and then you ease different parts to fit each other when you are sewing. So you end up with 3 seams for this bottom of the back, and I'm going to sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance using a regular straight stitch on my trusty old brother sewing machine that has been coming on strong for all of these years. So I'm just going ahead to finish off this seam before going in to press all of my seams nice and flat, and then pinning together the top back panel to the rest of the bottom back that we just finished stitching. So when you're sewing curved seams like this, there is really no rush, because what you're doing is you're sewing 2 curved or 2 like rounded edges together, and you definitely have to stretch one to fit the other. So just take your time when you're sewing it, and if you find that there are parts where you have to stretch one edge a little bit to meet with the other, then go ahead and do so. No panic, no rush. So once that is all done, I just went ahead and I pressed down all of my seams. As you can see, the boxes do not match, and I did not just let that bother me. But if you're really good at matching boxes when it comes to plaid or tartan prints, then go ahead. But I didn't just want to focus on that, and I didn't just want that to become a bother in my head. But in the future, if I'm able to tackle that, I will let you guys know how I figure it out. So now I'm just pinning together the shoulder seams like so, pinning the front to the back, and I'm going to sew them together on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So when we have the shoulders joined in place, we can go ahead to work on the pockets or on the sleeve or on any other part that you decide to tackle first. So the next thing I'm going to focus on is fixing the inseam pockets, and I've put the different pairs on the different sides of the jacket, and I'm going to start with this side here. So what you do is you grab one side of the pair and you place right sides together along the side seam, and because it has a notched point along the side, you know exactly where you're supposed to place this particular piece. So you do this for each side, and what you do next is you sew the edges together. So the edge of one side of the pocket to the edge of maybe the front or the back, depending on where you're starting with. So I'm just adding a few more pins before going ahead to stitch up these sides on my sewing machine. So sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, I'm just going to start with this particular side first, and I'm going to sew it straight like so, and then I'm going to go back in with a 0.3 edge stitch, and what this will do is it will keep the pocket back inside at all time to just prevent it from coming out loosely when you wear your jacket or your coat. So I repeated that for the other side before going ahead to place them together like this, placing right sides together for the coat as well as for your pockets, which have been connected like this. So once you pin everything in place, matching all of your notches, and you take this to stitch on your machine, you know, once you're sewing the side seam from the underarm, you sew all the way around the pocket bag like so, and then when you get to the bottom, you come out this way and finish to the hem of the jacket with one continuous stitch. So you need to do this for the left and the right hand side, which is where you have the pockets. So I'm just sewing here on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and when I get to this point, turn it like this so I can sew into the edge or the seam of the pocket bag so it's closed off and you actually have a pocket bag that holds your valuables in place. Once you approach the end of the pocket like this, you come back into the side, you keep your needle in, raise your footer and turn it back into the side seam of the coat, and then you sew all the way till the end till you reach the hem of this piece. So I did that for the left and for the right hand side. I went ahead and pressed all of my seams flat just to relax the threads, and this is what the pocket should look like. This is one of the simplest and easiest pockets to make, and it's quite flattering when you do it right. You can also go ahead and do either a jet, a welt, or a patch pocket depending on what you prefer. I just thought this would be really easy to incorporate into this coat design. So the next thing I'm going to work on is the Revere collar, and I've placed out my Revere collar pieces here. You should have two, so when you sew it in such a way and you bag it out, you have a nice and finished edge. So I've just put the right sides together, I've pinned it in place, and we're going to be sewing this sort of semi-straight edge like this because that's what you see on the outside of the lapel or the collar. And when you sew up until this point, you turn your needle this way, you sew around this sort of back neckline point, you go back into the front side, you turn towards this corner that sits into the lapel, and then you finish off this way. So you would need to turn this inside out, press it nice and flat before going ahead to fix it into the neckline of your coat. So I had already done this, and right now I'm just pinning all my notch points, so my center back, my shoulder, and where it's supposed to sit along the lapel. You can do this in such a way that you can also put your facing on top and sew everything in one go, but I find pinning the collar like this and then just doing a stitch that is like 0.5 centimeter to just hold it in place, so sewing it from the beginning to the end of the Revere collar along the neckline would not only help you prevent like mistakes that can happen, such as like pleating or gathering, because you do have to do a lot of stretching for the Revere collar to sit nicely into the neckline of your jacket or of your coat. So I'm just taking my time and stretching, easing things in place until I get to the end, and I'm sewing on a 0.5 seam allowance. So when I come back to put my facing on top, my facing stitch would cover up this 0.5 stitch that we just did here. Next up, we're going to be sewing our facings in place. I'm grabbing my back and my front facings, and I'm pinning together the shoulder points, so we have one full piece that is connected by the shoulder and we can incorporate into the coat along the neckline. So I'm just adding a few more pins here to just hold my shoulder seam in place, and I'm going to take this to my domestic machine and sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, joining shoulder points, so when it's all connected together, you see you have one round piece that can fit into the neckline of your coat or your jacket. So I'm just sewing like so, using my reverse stitch at the beginning. At the end, I went ahead and I pressed my seams open before coming back to sandwich my Revere collar with this facing piece. So as you can see here, I'm matching center front to center front, shoulder points to shoulder point, notch to notch, and because I've already stitched that Revere collar inside like so, I don't have to think too much about whether the Revere collar is staying in place or not. So I pinned it up the front as well and along the hem, and you're going to sew along the hem up the front like this around your lapel sort of curve or edge, and then round the neckline like this, trapping the Revere collar in place, and then round to the other side of the jacket. So when you're sewing the hem, you're going to sew the hem on a 2 centimeter seam allowance because that's going to help you fix your lining. And then when you get to the front part, you turn it like this and sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is the normal seam allowance that we put in the pattern when we're making it anyways. So you just sew with one continuous stitch all the way around. When you get to your lapel edge, you leave your needle in, you turn it around like so, and then you just continue stitching all around the neckline. So when you get to where your Revere collar is, just remember to double check that everything is flat and you don't have any weird pleats or puckers, because it will show if there's any mistake there. So I'm just going down my other back neckline, down the front and down to the hem on a 2 centimeter seam allowance. The next thing you need to do is you need to trim the edges, because especially at the lapel point, because you want that edge of the coat or the jacket to come out looking really sharp and clean. And then you need to cut tiny snips along the neckline seam, so when you turn this inside out, that edge relaxes a whole lot easier. So I'm just going to go in and turn this inside out, revealing my Revere collar, revealing my lapel. And because of how I place my Revere collar and my facing, the lavender fabric is on the outside of the jacket like this. So you can decide to do it the other way around, but I just thought it was a much cooler effect to place the fabric in this direction. So if you want to come out this way, you just have to sort of follow the similar steps I did. And as you can see, the back of the Revere collar just corresponds to the back of the jacket because of this top panel that we made here. So when you turn up the collar like this, you see the navy blue plaid on the inside, and then on the outside you have the lavender or sort of blue combination. I went ahead and I pressed everything flat, including my hem, pressing it on. I pressed it on about 2 centimeter hem allowance, so I don't have to think too much when it's time to fix my lining. I also pinned in my shoulder pads so that this will just make my life so much easier when it's time to sew my sleeves into the jacket. So I've gone ahead and I've pinned my sleeve side seams together, having the right side of the material on the inside and the wrong side is what we can see right now. And I'm going to be sewing together the edges of the epaulets as well, so the sides as well as the sharp points, leaving the bottom part open, the bottom short part, which is what would sit into the shoulder of your sleeve and your armhole. So I've sewn my epaulet edges together, I pressed it flat, and as you can see I left one edge open because that way we can turn it inside out. I also took the liberty to sew and press the side seams of my sleeve. I did that for the left and for the right hand side, and this particular step you can skip and do when you're sewing the sleeve, but I just think it's a much better idea to just pin the epaulets on the top of the sleeve head, so exactly where your shoulder point will be. And if you've marked a notch on your sleeve, this would be so much easier. And then we're going to tack this down on a 0.5 seam allowance. So you can either put pin here in place, and then when it's time to fix the sleeve into the armhole of your jacket, you know it's already there and ready to be fixed. So I'm just pinning my sleeve into this armhole here, matching my side seams, matching my notches, matching sort of the sleeve head to sleeve head, before going ahead to fix the sleeve into the armhole of the jacket, sewing on a round. If you find that this is a bit tricky, you can go the other way and fix the sleeve head first and then join the side seam of the sleeve and the side seam of your coat in one go. But I just find when it comes to outerwear, doing it like this is, I don't know, I just find it easier to do. It's just my preference. You might prefer something else. So I'm just adding a few more pins here to keep my sleeve in place. And then this is what I've done for the right hand side and for the left hand side. I just pinned everything put. I also included my shoulder pads, and what I did with the shoulder pads is I marked the middle of the shoulder pad and then I aligned that midpoint to the shoulder seam, so there is half of the shoulder pad on the front and on the back. So I'm just going in here to sew my sleeves into my armhole on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, sewing ever so slowly, because if the sleeve doesn't come out right, it would show on the outside of the jacket. So you also would sew your shoulder pad as you are sewing the sleeve into the armhole, and that would just give the shoulder of the jacket a lot more structure, and it just looks really nice and has this really cool 70s 80s vibes to it. So I did that for the left hand side, and because we already had our epaulets stitched down in place, it was sewn into the sleeve seam like so. Now moving on to the lining for the coat, I have taken the lower T to pin the shoulder seams of the front to the back as well as the side. I've also pinned together that 2 cm extension that is on the top and on the bottom, because that gives you room to move when you have this piece on. So I've also pinned together the side seams of my sleeve lining as well, which is in this lavender plaid fabric. And I'm going to be sewing them on a 1 cm seam allowance from the beginning all the way to the end, sewing the shoulders, sewing my side seams as well as the sleeve side seams for the left and for the right hand side, not forgetting to do my back stitch at the ends to secure my seams in place. With that all done, I went ahead and I pinned both sleeves into the armhole of the lining like so. I just put enough pins to prevent anything from shuffling or moving around, and I'm going to be sewing the sleeves into the armhole of both sides of the lining on a 1 cm seam allowance with a normal straight stitch from the beginning all the way to the end. So because the lining had a little bit of stretch, it was easy to ease the sleeve into the armhole of the lining compared to the actual fabric, which didn't have a lot of stretch to it. So I'm just finishing off this sleeve, and you do this for the left and for the right hand side. So you have one whole piece that you join to your coat along the facing edge on the inside of the jacket. So I'm just grabbing my lining piece like this, and I'm going to turn it in such a way that I have the wrong side showing. So I'm starting with the center back point, and I'm just pinning it together like this. So the center back of the lining to the center back of the back facing, matching shoulder point to shoulder point. I'm matching sort of notches I created along that facing lining connection on the front. Do this for the left, for the right hand side, and you also need to pin the hem of the lining to the hem of the jacket. So if you've already pressed the hem fold in place, it will make pinning the hem of the lining to the hem of the actual coat a lot easier. So when it comes to the hem, you want to match your side seams, your center backs, but you want to make sure that this particular corner here, this corner right here, oh lord, it will make or break your coat. So you just have to take your time when you are sewing. So pin it in such a way that you have the bottom straight and you have the side straight, so when you're sewing you can easily turn from either the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top. But you also need to remember to leave an opening on the hem of the jacket or the hem of the coat, so you can easily turn this inside out when you stitched your lining to your coat. So you just go around with one continuous stitch along the bottom, up the side, around the neck, down the other side and down to the bottom, remembering to leave a hole that is about 5 inches open. Sewing on a 1 cm seam allowance, I am now sewing the hem of my coat to the hem of my lining, sewing ever so slowly, and when I get to the corner I fold out as much as I can so I can connect easy. It's not a very straightforward thing to do, but from that hem to the front of this particular side, if you think it'd be a whole lot easier for you to hand tack the edges, please do so, because if it doesn't look really nice on that side of the inside of the lining, it will show and it doesn't really look very nice. It doesn't really look very professional. So you sew all the way around till you get to the other side of the hem, remembering to leave that hole open like so. So what I'm doing here is I connected the lining to the main sleeve on the hem like this before dragging them out, so I could sew the sleeve lining to the main sleeve in such a way that there is no raw edge on the when you look inside of the sleeve. So I'm just pulling this out like this, and I'm going to pin together the hem of both sleeves. So when I say both sleeves, I mean the the sleeve, which is the main one, and the lavender one, which is the lining. So I'm just adding a few more pins, making sure to join the side seams first and then joining up the other sides, and then sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance before pushing this back into the jacket and pulling it out through the armhole, so you have something that looks like this. So I wanted this lavender on the inside, so when you turn up the sleeves you see a bit of the lavender material, and it just really connects with the lapel and the Revere, which has the same fabric. So I'm just going in here to stitch my whole clothes after sewing the hem of the sleeve for both sides. Remember to sew the left and the right hand side, and I'm just hand stitching the whole clothes like this, taking a little bit of the main fabric and a little bit of the lining and sewing so that you don't see the stitch on the inside or on the outside of the coat. So when you get to the end, just remember to tie a knot to secure your stitch, and then cut off any excess thread so you finish off the entire hem of the jacket and you don't have any raw seams showing on the inside. The next thing you need to do is to think about your buttons or your fastenings. I've marked where I want my button to sit as well as my buttonhole, and I also marked my buttonholes for the epaulette as well, because you need to secure it along the shoulder of the coat or of your jacket. So I've marked my buttonhole opening, and the button is going to sit along the shoulder. So you need to do this for the left and for the right shoulder of your coat. So I have a separate video showing how to actually make buttonholes on your domestic machine, and I'll link it somewhere on the screen and down below. So if you haven't seen that already, you can check it out. But if you can't do that yourself in your machine, you can easily take it to someone who has like a proper buttonhole machine to do this for you, and then you just hand stitch your buttons in place. You can decide to have more than one button. I just thought having one button was sort of cool and good enough. So this is what the inside of the jacket looks like. I need to give it a bit of a press to relax all of my seams around the neck, around the front, and around the hem of the jacket as well. So once that is pressed and everything is looking nice and neat, the jacket is done 3 days after, and we finally finished this coat. This is the finished result. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Actually, I've worn this coat like twice already, and people keep asking me, where is your coat from, where is your coat from, and I'm like, I made it. And that's the beauty of making your own pieces, because it's really one of a kind, is really unique, and you just have a deeper connection when you wear your own things. So if you did enjoy watching this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment all of your thoughts, suggestions and questions down below, and until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.